Unfazed Under Fire. I'm David Craig Utz, the Resilient Leadership Guy, your host and moderator for the show. Now, this show aims to support executives like you in strengthening your impact as leaders and your resilience so you can thrive in today's uncertain, disruptive, crazy world. This show is a stand for creating and bringing forth breakthroughs in how we develop leaders and organizational cultures so that they are providing the most uplifting, rewarding work experiences for your talent, while also igniting the best in them to bring service to the mission and priorities of your organization. The desire for an evolution in leadership development is based in the truth that human beings have all the resourcefulness they need within them to rise above and address the biggest challenges we're facing today, and to be able to do so with grace. The first step to tapping into this inner resource, which is a birthright to claim, comes from recognizing that leading and living are truly inside-out journeys. That means that if an executive genuinely desires to have positive impact on the world around them, they first must gain some level of self-mastery or self-leadership from within themselves. And once they gain such mastery, it sets the stage for powerfully leading others. And without it, especially during these times, leading at best can be a confusing endeavor. Today, it's a great pleasure to be joined by special guest Sarah Carlsen, who is a dear colleague of mine. Sarah is an executive leadership and team coach with nearly 2 decades of experience in empowering individuals and teams to reach their full potential. She's a certified Integrative 9 Enneagram practitioner and is also certified in the Leadership Circle profile, a background that she and I share. She brings a unique combination of analytical precision and empathetic insight, as she often describes herself as having an engineer brain with an empathetic heart. This fusion allows Sarah to excel in complex organizational environments where she integrates individual strengths with broader organizational goals. Now, since founding Carlsen Coaching Consulting, Sarah has helped transform some of the most challenging teams into high-performing collaborative powerhouses. I'm maybe looking forward to hearing a couple of stories today. Leveraging tools like the Enneagram and the Leadership Circle profile, as I mentioned, she specializes in developing self-awareness, shared vision, and a culture of accountability that fosters both individual growth and organizational success, which is the goal. As a thought leader in leadership development, she thrives in guiding her clients through moments of disruption and complexity, which we have plenty of today. Whether working with leadership teams, partnerships, or individuals, Sarah has a gift for helping people identify what's working, what's in the way, and how to take action to achieve their goals. And with her deep expertise of execution and passion she cultivates high trust, high performing cultures. I'm really excited to dive into the conversation today. Now, on a personal note, she lives an hour south of the Twin Cities, just a little ways away from me. With her husband, Brad, she's launched 3 adult children in the world, which is quite a feat, including 2 twin girls, Anika and Siri, who are 25, and a son, Tegan, who is 20. Hope I got the pronunciation of those names all right. Welcome to the show, Sarah. Did I miss anything that you think I should be sharing about your background, or you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think the only thing, and we'll get into this, David, is I did train with the Global or Center for Relationship on organizational and relationship systems coaching, and I have to say, so I did that training in 2019. Which is why I'm realizing more and more I put all of my work in a systems context, because we're always an individual operating inside of different systems. And I think that combination really shifts how we understand ourselves and each other. And so I just realized I didn't really put that into my my bio, but it is actually core to how I do this work. And then the only other thing I would say is it is Annika and Siri and Tegan, which even though it looks like Tegan.
Tegan.
So, yeah. And I would say
there you go. That's why I need to be. I
was just going to say, and parenting twins is part of what kicked off a lot of my work in a way, starting to see the differences between 2 children who are born 6 minutes apart and how they came into the world as different kids and developed differently and how we responded to them differently. And so I feel like those 2 especially were part of my early training.
Well, parenting is definitely a test at times, isn't it? For seeing where we have to grow ourselves, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And also learning how to be more effective in the world, for sure.
Yeah.
So great. Well, so So as with my, first time guest, I really like you to talk a little bit about your journey in your own words. This is one of my favorite parts of the show, actually, because we
Yeah.
all take this circuitous route in life. And the more we hear these stories, the more we recognize maybe we can relax a little bit more and be more present, because kind of, if you look at the long journey of life, it tends to always, might have turns, but it always ends up in a pretty good place for most part. So
Yeah.
just if you could share a little bit about your general, about your journey,
Yeah.
how you came into the work you're doing and that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was a math major more by default than by choice. It was what my older brother had done, and I liked him, wanted to be like him, and that made me, you'll understand from an Enneagram 3 lens, it made me look smart. And so I got my teaching credentials and taught for 6 months and was terrible as a long-term sub, and had known I didn't want to teach, and I did it anyway for various reasons. So my first real job ended up being as a systems analyst, and then in my role, I ended up being kind of between the technical people and the end users. So it was more, like a business analyst role. And I realized that I was held differently than other people in that role, because business people were like, oh, you know technology and I don't know technology, so you must know something. And then the technical people would and I really enjoyed being in that nexus between the two, between the business and the technical. And so that was my initial work, and it was for a financial services firm. And they were very methodical about how to do the work. So I learned how to do project management and that kind of thing in a very methodical, thoughtful way. And then my husband and I decided to move to Seattle, Washington, to make sure we could hike and backpack more in our lifetimes. And I ended up landing in a law firm, and it was a high-tech kind of firm. They did a lot of high-tech business. And I often say I grew up in law firms. And what that means is that in a law firm environment, you've got a lot of really highly paid, very smart people who are trained to argue. They are not trained necessarily about collaboration and all of that. And initially it was in the 90s. So that industry was going through a bunch of mergers and acquisitions. So, and I was in information systems, and my initial job was multifaceted, but I became the first project manager because I got in there and I was like, this is total chaos. We're throwing in systems and things are failing. And, there isn't any planning really happening because it's, this attorney wants this attorney group wants this. And we'd be like, okay, we'll do that. Okay, we'll do that. And then we'd blow up things. And I just felt like
That's a rough environment.
This doesn't work. And so my boss asked when she took over the role, what do you think we need? And I said, we need project management. She said, okay, do you want to do that? And I was like, okay. So I became the first project manager, and then slowly worked with senior leaders and all of that to have that become more of a standard practice. So we were kind of every year iterating the process. So, shouldn't we think about what projects we're trying to do to achieve what business outcomes to get to the right budget instead of just throwing numbers at a budget and calling it good, So we would get more and more kind of methodical, but at the same time, things were moving fast. And so that structure was really foundational in that, we had 10 different offices. We were merging and acquiring firms all the time. We were bringing different cultures together. My responsibility was often about bringing systems together or rolling out new systems and then getting people trained on them. But I was in a role with no power. Nobody reported to me at that point. And I had to build relationships with the managing partner and the office administrator in all these different firms. And so I had to start to understand power dynamics. And in a law firm, unlike other more traditional structures, just because you have chief behind your title, so you're the chief human resources officer, if one of the attorneys brings in a lot of money and they don't want to do what you're recommending they do, they just won't do it. And then they figure you're going to be gone in a couple of years anyway, so whatever. And so it really was a fertile ground for learning about relational dynamics and power structures and all of that. And so then fast forward, I have my twins, and I've said to my boss, I don't think I want to work full time. And she decided to add a middle tier of managers because she had, 30 direct reports or something. So I became a manager, and she said, well, we don't have any management training, but you could work with this coach. And I was like, seriously? you're going to pay for a work therapist for me? I don't even know what that means. This is 1999, so this is a long time ago. And I'm a middle manager at that point. I couldn't believe they were doing this. And it was great.
That's
And
great.
she really helped me understand, like, this is a new job. How do I was holding people small. I was going from being a peer to being a supervisor. I was trying to make things happen in a world where I still didn't have much power because I still wasn't, I was an expense. I'm not a, resource, or I wasn't a revenue source. And so I learned a lot from her, and then ended up working with her as a life coach as well. And she really helped me ask those bigger questions. What's the life you want? How are you doing the kinds of things you want? And in having those bigger conversations about what I really value in this world, what I really want in this world, it made Brad and me start to have conversations about, we loved Seattle. We loved our life out there. We had great friends, all sorts of things. We both had these big jobs. And it was a little bit out of alignment with my values. I really value family. All our family's back here. I really wanted to be able to raise my own kids. And I was working, 60 hours a week, even though it was over 4 days. It just, like, our life wasn't working, even though it looked like it was working. And so we took a leap, moved back to Minnesota with 3 kids under 6 and no jobs, because we just wanted to see what we, create the world we wanted back here. And so I contracted with law firms. I was a little bit plug and play because I could do IT and project management, and everybody needed that. And then at one point, when my youngest got into school, I reached out to my former coach and said, I need a few sessions with you. I love the freedom I've got right now, but I'm working for a firm and it's kind of painful work. It's not a great environment. I'm not hired in at the right level. I can't work with the leadership. I'm hired in IT. And I had one session with her and I was like, oh, I want to be a coach. I want to do what you're doing. And at that point, she was only coaching leaders of startup tech firms and helping them create their cultures and helping them. And I was just like, that's a job. That sounds fantastic, because having lived through so many, different cultures in these law firm offices, it's like the leader has so much impact on how the environment feels, how engaged people are, all of that. And I was like, if I can help make that better, that's what I want to do. And so that kicked off my coaching journey, and that was about 2010. And then I'm always learning more. So I got certified and then moved through a number of different trainings at that point.
Oh, well, I mean, again, it's so that to me, it's like you followed what was next in life and tried and followed your nose. That's kind of what you did. I mean, that's what we all do. Yeah. I mean, greatest set of plans, long-term plans sometimes.
Yep.
They can work out. I mean, some people want to be a doctor. They decide to become a doctor,
Right.
That happens. But it's also noticing, like, you work at that law firm and all of a sudden project management was clearly needed.
Yeah.
And they said yes.
Yep.
And then the challenges you ran, and I can't imagine some of the challenges you ran into to try to manage integrating project management into a law firm, which is probably the toughest environment to organize of all environments. Maybe some of the early days in the Big Four, that was like that. But that must have been very challenging. Like, what are you asking me to do that for? I would imagine you heard that a few times.
Right. Yeah. And I really, it was, like I said, really fertile training ground. I didn't know what I was training for, but had I not worked with that coach, I would have, because I'm an Enneagram 3, and we can talk more about that, I would have kept doing the next thing that they wanted from me. I would have kept, okay, you want me to do this bigger job? Okay. You want me to do this? Okay. If you see that for me, I'll keep doing it. And that engagement with her was the first time I was like, oh, wait, I've got some choice here. And how do I start to really look at what do I want to do in this life and what's the kind of life I want to have? And that was a pivotal moment, because I would have just stayed on the track until I burned myself out. I would have burned myself out. I have no doubt.
Yeah, we'll definitely get it. I want to go in and talk about your Enneagram type and what you've learned along the journey and that. But let's step back into now the work that you're doing today. We're going to step into that for just a little bit. And your primary role is going into helping organizations. And I would say at the highest level would be fair to say executive leadership and team dynamics and effectiveness and performance. Yeah. So, and I'm asking this question, when I ask this question for executives that are listening, I'm asking you to listen to the answer from a perspective of how you approach stakeholders, how your team approaches stakeholders. So I'm asking you just to understand how Sarah does it, but I also want, it can be very instructive, because in our work as consultants, we have to do what I'm going to ask you to do, and you have a particular way of doing it. So with that caveat, when your clients come to you, how do you determine how to best serve them, how to best approach an engagement with them? They already say, we got the money here, we got the pot of money,
Right.
we heard great things about you.
Right.
I think this is what we need. Can you come in and help us do that? Which is not unusual, right? So with that being said, what do you do in that situation to make sure you're on the right trajectory with the client?
Yeah. Well, what I find is that people ask for what they know to ask for. So they might ask, do you do culture assessments? Do you do strategic planning? We think we need this. And so the first conversation is really just my listening and asking questions. And my job, and it's not unlike one-on-one coaching. It's like I'm trying to get at what's really the ask here. What are the outcomes they're looking for?
Right.
What's not working? Because if they're reaching out, something's not working. And what they're thinking is the thing that's not working may or may not be the thing. And so the first conversation is really my trying to expand their thinking about what are the possibilities here. Are we talking about, is this an employee engagement problem? Is this a conflict problem? Is this actually, it's, because as they're talking, I'm getting a picture of what's happening. And so I might start to say, so it sounds like there's been a big disruption in the industry. You've got a brand new team. 14 other things are happening, so I'll kind of paint the picture back to them and they'll start to go, yeah, yep, those are the things. And it's like, okay, well, and then for me, I work again, because I work in a systems context and I'm using an adaptive approach. What that means is, it really matters how you enter the system. And so I'm always entering the system in some way to get more information about the whole. And so that might mean, if it's a senior team, I might say, okay, how about if we start with interviews? Let me interview everybody for a half hour, for 45 minutes. I'll ask them what's working, what's not. I'll bring the themes back. And the first session will be, I'm bringing themes and you're reflect, what do I have right? What do I not have right? And the goal I always have for senior teams is you want to be having the right conversations at the right time with the right skill level. And often what's happening is there's a bunch of stuff happening under the surface, information the system needs that's not getting to the surface for whatever reason, or it's often something like that. So what I'll say to the leader when I'm coming in is I'll say, let's start with, say, 3 sessions or 4 sessions based on whatever they've told me. And I'll say, we'll do this first session. I'll bring back the themes. And then out of that, something new will have emerged. And then you and I will align and we'll talk about what's needed next. And then I'll come in and then we'll do the next thing. And so I'm not coming with, we do this and then we do this and then we do this. Because part of the systems model is the wisdom exists in the system. So they have the wisdom. I'm not bringing here's the solution. They know how to run their company better than I do. What I am bringing is, from a systems coaching lens, it's about revealing the system so it sees itself more clearly. So I'm trying to help them see the patterns that exist in systems that develop over time, some of which are getting outcomes they want, some of them are getting outcomes that they don't want. And once they start to see the patterns, then they'll go, oh, we can't do that anymore. And and that's why I'm saying we're building the skill at the same time, because you also have, if you have 10 people in a room, some of them want to go directly at conflict. Some of them want to avoid conflict at all costs. Some of them are going to abdicate. People are, depending on their roles, depending on their sense of power, depending on their personality, all those things could be happening. And my job is to help them get the right information out. So I do a lot of normalizing and a lot of saying, well, so it sounds like you have this pattern that when this happens, then this happens, and then the outcome you get is this. Is that right? And I may or may not be right, but either way, they'll say, oh yeah, that's exactly it, or no, it's actually this. And then it's like, all right, now we see better what's happening. So then what? Now that you see something, now how do you want to respond, and what's going to bring that forward? And so usually in the sessions, we're generating a lot of information. And then by the end of the session, I'm trying to get, I'm getting to, so what now? What's going to move this team forward? What's going to deepen the trust and forward the action at the same time in a way that gets better outcomes? Did I answer the question?
Yeah, you did a great job. And I want to just into, kind of, and what I'm hearing is number one, you get them to slow down step back and look at the systemic connections to what their proposed problem is,
Yep.
or whatever area you're going to go. And you then go out and say, okay, I know enough to be dangerous because I don't know your business, and I don't know enough about this dynamic.
Right.
So I go out and I'm going to talk to the people that are most involved in that dynamic and moving it forward or dealing with it so you get the result you want.
Yep.
And then when I'm going and then I'm saying, here's what I heard, like what we all should be doing. You were listening, which is here's what I understood.
Yep.
And I would imagine when you do that well, the buy-in about what you do gets strengthened because people feel heard.
Yep.
They have confidence that you could do something about it, and therefore all of a sudden they get more excited about the potential. And are there cases in which there's some direction away from the original requests that they made that you say, well, really, we can't, although you want us to do a cultural engagement survey and do something about that, we better start over here, because if we do that, we might miss some piece that would actually slow us down. Does that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I try and say up front when I'm designing the engagement with them, saying, okay, I really hear that this is what you think you want. And if that's the right solution, that's what we'll do. But let's start here. Let's enter here. After that first session, we'll have a lot better information. And that might be the right next step, or it might be the fourth step. And so if I say that, then they don't feel like I'm doing a bait and switch, because I'm not. It really is like, how do we get to what's actually needed given where you guys are, and what's happening in your industry.
And that's what the best coaches and consultants do. They are of service to the need, and they're able to adapt to the need as you say you do. It's also, I find it interesting. It's kind of similar to like life is a big system, right? And what we talked about our circuitous route. I don't know exactly what step 2 or 3 is, but I know if we do this, we're going to have a lot clearer idea what to do next.
Exactly.
So there's, again, while I understand long term we want to get to certain results, what we have to do is get traction in a certain way with moving towards that with the right first step.
Yep.
And you take a lot of time to get buy-in on that. That makes complete sense to me. That's great. And again, I think that that's something that leaders can do better and their teams can do better, and organizations to do that needs assessment, if you will. Sometimes, executives feel they have to know the answer right away.
Yep.
Rather than saying, I'm not sure I do understand your organization. They understand more of the business than we do when we walk in the door and so forth. So they're also, that's a blessing and a curse, right? When you're trying to assess what to do to have impact. Yep. But it's something that, that a lot of executives and their teams could deploy as a practice. Yeah. So appreciate you sharing that.
And
you work with,
lean in.
You say something. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I lean into Jennifer Garvey Berger's research on complex systems and complexity and leading in complexity. And her work really points to, leaders need to listen to learn, not teach. It's a different approach to leading when what you're dealing with is complexity and not just complicated. When the variables are all changing and the people are all changing, and, that's complexity, and it is a different stance. And it's not what feels like traditional leadership, because it feels like you're supposed to know the way. And it's a very different approach. But her research on leading in complexity has really informed how I approach this. Like, how do you listen to learn? How do you get the right information integrated into the organization so the decisions you're making are based on the right data?
Well, and I've had technology CIOs on the show before, and who do complex change systems with, incorporating AI. They say the same thing. Their first job is to go around and I know nothing, and I'm going to go around and find out what everybody else knows, and I'm going to listen and learn. And so again, this is a principle of operating that serves us well in relationships, right? Sometimes absolutely. I know what I think is better for my partner before she even tells me what's going on. So I know I get into trouble with that. So
absolutely.
So, and you work with a lot of teams facing disruption and complexity. And I think you shared a couple of themes in what I'm looking at. But what themes do you notice in leadership or in teams when things aren't going well that they need to look at? Not like detailed themes, but overarching themes that are getting in their way. And how do you help leaders and teams course correct in those themes? Or it's maybe a big question.
Yeah.
Answer it any way you think I ask it.
Yeah. Well, the way I think about it is, if things are going well and everybody's making money, the cracks aren't revealed. But it's in moments of disruption, either, revenues have fallen, or, senior partners left, or you're having you're having a lot of turnover. Those are all signals from the system, is how I think about it. And so that reveals that something's not working. It's like, okay, how do we understand what's not working? And I think the biggest signal people skip is emotional stuff, because it's uncomfortable and we're not supposed to talk about emotion at work. But I think what we learned coming through the pandemic is, people were, during that, that sudden shock, there was so much fear and so much grief and so much pain. And then leaders are in the situation, they're like, how am I supposed to respond to this? And then, as we came through to the other side and things felt normal again, things had changed pretty significantly, and it's hard to see that. And so I think a lot about, how do you build leaders who are more comfortable dealing with the emotional field, which means not overreacting to it, but also not ignoring it. And what I mean by emotional field is, you walk into a room, and the way I'm wired, you can feel it, like, wow, it's heavy in here. It's people are angry, people are defended, people are like, you can feel that stuff. And I think leaders often go to, oh, I better make that better. And then they'll start talking, or they'll decide that they need to do something to make everybody feel better, rather than saying, wow, there's a lot of heaviness in here today. It feels like a thunderstorm just went through. What's going on? And if people feel safe enough, if the environment is, if there's psychological safety, then people might start to say, well, that person got fired last week. There hasn't been good communication about it. So my whole team is really scared. And they brought that to me this morning, and now I'm feeling responsible. It's like, oh, good information. But they got the good information because they noticed, that the feeling was off. And so so for leaders to be, again, I'm going back to what your question was about, what are the themes that I see in disruption? It's like, disruption reveals what's already there in a bigger way.
Right.
And then people with
more
disruption,
like, shines the light on the issues, right?
Yeah, exactly. Time. It exposes things. And then people might overreact to what's being exposed, because it's, it's vulnerable. Like, shoot, we thought these things were working, but it turns out, like, if you narrow it down to a partnership, it turns out, yeah, we haven't been managing our money well, or we haven't gave you too much power and I've been too absent. Okay, how do we deal with that in a way that doesn't mean we have to end the partnership, but it does mean, yep, there was something not working. What do we do now? And so those themes of, like, what are the things that get exposed when there's disruption, and how do we handle them? Again, the reason I talk about systems so much is, if you're a systems inspired leader, you just take all of those as signals, and it's just information. It's not, I did something wrong, you did something wrong, we gotta, get out of this situation as fast as possible. You slow down to go, what are the signals saying? What does this mean? What's needed from me now? Where do I need more information? How do we bring people together to solve whatever's emerging here?
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me, going back to the leadership circle, kind of quick, the reactiveness of the organization, where it reacts becomes obvious, right?
Yep.
Where it's off balance becomes obvious.
Yep.
So that and that at the undercurrent of that is emotional triggering that sends people into survival mechanisms.
Yep. Great way to think about it.
We're not always our best when we're contracted in survival mechanism, and usually that's happening when the ground is shaking, right? Because it feels like the saber-toothed tiger walked in the room, and I've got to save my life, and that's a little bit extreme, but the idea is that and in that situation you can see the dysfunctions emerge that you point to, or a lot of times our emotional reaction to each other, that certainly have responses to maybe inequality in power, or we're not taking care of our money well, or we really have been working our team really hard and not really taking care of them. All these, those are the kinds of things that boil up at that time. And
Yep.
something you said about it, I want to follow up on is, okay, you got all these triggered executives and they're emotionally reacting.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to say, listen, you got to, as Bob Newhart said, stop that,
Mm-hmm.
have you ever saw it, do that video? Like, just stop that. You don't do that.
Right.
So what are some of the things you do to help leaders stem the tide of that reactivity and learn how to be in a more centered, creative, attentive place?
Yeah. Well, what I'm learning, each time, I keep learning about, I'm seeding things in earlier. So now I'll enter earlier with normalizing things like, because we can, and depending on the team and how open they are to different kinds of ideas, but we know that if people are in their survival brain or the emotional brain, they aren't making their best decisions. We need them to be in the executive state of
Right.
their brain, and so I'll just normalize like, as leaders, we want you to spend as much time there as possible. In leadership circle profile terms, that's, be in your creative state, not your reactive state. And so then for people to understand, like, when we're in that emotional or our survival brain, we don't know that we are lots of times. We think we're being highly functional, and so starting to help them understand how they can tell, what are the early warning signs, and then what do they need to do to return to an executive state? Because if a leader walks into a room and they're in their survival brain, they might take everybody out, because they've got the most power,
Right.
they're reactive, and anxiety spreads through a system really, really, really rapidly. And so for them to understand, so for individual leaders, I think a lot about how do you know when you're in the wrong brain state? What are the signals from your body, from your heart, from your brain, from your environment that you can pay attention to? And then once you realize that's where you are, what do you need to do to get back to your grounded state? And, is that about practicing mindfulness?
Right.
Is it taking a walk outside? Is it like hitting a baseball bat for a while to get the energy out? Different people need different things, but I try and normalize, like, this is what we do as humans. A threat comes in and we react until we can start to catch, like, oh, I'm feeling threatened. How do I slow it down enough to then make a choice about how I respond? And that's a big move. And so I love that you talk about inner to outer leadership, because it's that internal state. If we have mastery of that,
at least everything.
Everything that comes after that's going to go better if we can get back to a grounded state.
Yeah, and there's various ways to do that, and certainly the Enneagram can help. We'll talk about your tools now, like it can help with understanding where if I'm an 8, it's like I'm losing control. I try to exert more control in that moment. As a 3, I'm like, hunker down and just check off the next box. Whatever it is. As a 4, I'm going to go into my imagination and start like, imagining the worst case scenario. So there's different ways that we do that, and understand that those tools help that. And and one of the things you're certified in the Enneagram, Integrative 9 Enneagram, and also the Leadership Circle, both of which I appreciate, are tools that I use. I love them. Can you share your perspective, maybe related to what you were just saying, how these tools work together to help leaders unlock their potential, and maybe share any examples where you made significant impact by integrating those tools, if you had that opportunity to do so, when you've had that opportunity to do so.
So the way I think about it now, again, because I think about the systems lens so much, is the Enneagram helps reveal your inner operating system really clearly. And so as soon as someone lands in their type, and what I love about the integrative solutions tool gives you your type, which kind of breaks traditional Enneagram standards, but it's highly accurate. It's highly validated. I'm a big fan of highly accurate and validated tools. And so people generally get their report. Yeah. It's really nice. I don't need to do the research, but I'm glad they are researched, because I want it to be, I want to move the needle on things. But with the Enneagram, it's such a quick way to see, like, oh yeah, these are my gifts. Oh, yes, I do overuse those gifts and then they become liabilities. Oh, these are, so it just gives you a lot of information about, and I love Beatrice Chestnut's metaphor of the Enneagram is kind of describing your acorn self. Yeah. And your acorn self, and most of us stop there. We believe we're the acorn. We've got this hard shell around how we walk through the world. And then the idea is, once you can start to see your type, you can relax the acorn. It's like putting it underground and letting the shell devolve, and then, or dissolve, and then you can become an oak tree. And I often say to clients, we're going for the oak tree. Like, we don't want to hang out at your type. We want to expand. And so the Enneagram really helps them understand, like, oh, under stress, here's what eights tend to do. Can you see that in yourself? Where is that a huge strength? And where is that becoming a liability? And how do we start to understand that? So I often enter with the Enneagram with individuals and with teams, because it's a way to be seen. It's a way to talk about yourself. It's a way to understand stuff. And so it provides foundational language. So when I'm working with a team, then they have ways to talk about their different types. Yeah, it looked like we had to reconnect there for a minute. So anyway, so the Enneagram I think of as internal, and the leadership circle profile shows a lot of that stuff, or a lot of the internal states as well, with the reactive parts. I'm doing this because of the circle. But the leadership circle profile also helps you see, now in this system, how am I perceived? So with the person I report to, with my peers, with my direct reports, with other stakeholders, how am I showing up? And so now I've got a lot of information about my own system and the system and how I'm perceived within the systems I operate. And so combined, that really gives the individual and the team a lot of information about the kinds of things that might be getting in the way. So when I enter organizations, I often, even if I'm not doing interviews first, I'll start with the Enneagram, because that's a way, whether I'm working with an individual leader or a team, for them to start to understand their internal operating system. And so they can see their individual strengths and where they overuse their strengths and they become liabilities and that kind of thing. So I think about the Enneagram as a really quick way to understand our internal operating system. And then with the leadership circle profile, what I love about that tool is it helps you understand how you're perceived within the systems you operate. And so you get feedback from your boss's boss and your peers and your direct reports and any other stakeholders. And you start to see, oh, this group thinks I'm a great decision maker, or, I'm very decisive. This group doesn't think I'm decisive. And so it doesn't mean you're decisive or not. It does mean you're perceived differently in different spaces. And then we have more information about, where does it matter? And how are you showing up differently in these different groups? And so the combination of those two, while the leadership circle profile, I think, does a great job of helping you understand where you go when you're reactive, the Enneagram actually creates a path for, okay, so when I go there, what's the best way for me to get out? And how do I do that? And so I love working with the combination with both individuals and teams when they have the opportunity.
Yeah, and Bob baked the Enneagram almost understanding into the profile, amongst many other things.
Right.
But I do like that the individual pathway can actually make more sense of what I have to do about moving from high protective or high, control towards the other in that natural direction. What do I have to do around that? So, yeah, I love the combination of the tools as well. Now I'm going to take this to get more personal. It's going to relate to something you said before, because this is a question I've been waiting for. I've been enjoying the whole conversation, but I love this question. So I know that you're a type 3 on the Enneagram, known as the achiever.
Yep.
And to be quite frank, Sarah, I have found that the type 3, the achiever, is the most challenging one to work with. And you're different. You've developed and integrated to a degree, which I think you've done that integration. Because, as you know, achievers are so focused on the goals and the check boxes and the shiny bauble. You even talked about your coach helped you with this. So, for all those type 3s and high achievers out there, what was your journey to integrating, to being more vulnerable, to being more open to the internal world, to be in touch with your emotions and your feelings? What was that path for you? Can you share a little bit about that and what you would recommend to other high achievers if you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I have the fortunate or challenging thing in that my closest sister, she's 18 months older than I am, is a therapist. And so there was a moment when she was visiting me in Seattle, and I was up in the middle of the night worrying about a mistake I had made and feeling the pressure of the world, like the entire firm's success is sitting on my shoulders and whether I not do this right thing tomorrow. And she was looking at me and she just said, "You understand that's out of whack, right?" And I'm like, "Nope, nope, it isn't." I absolutely, now I think about it, I was in my full on 3
Like, I
trance.
think, yes, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Full on 3
I've had
trance.
similar conversations,
Yep. Threes
but
believe,
I have to do
but I
that.
have to do it. There is no choice here. This is so important. And she literally said, "David, you are calling in sick tomorrow, and I am calling a therapist for you." And I was like, "Nope, I am fine. I am going to work. We are not going to do that." And she had a little bit more credibility in that her husband had just died at 30 from a brain tumor the previous year. And so I knew she had wisdom that went well beyond her age. And so but it really took her saying, "You are basically not seeing things clearly here. The way you're responding to your work environment isn't good for you, and you need an intervention." And, I fought her and fought her and fought her. And then I called in sick. And surprisingly enough, the firm didn't collapse the next day. And actually, no one cared that much that I was gone. It's like, it was out of proportion. But that kind of got me to a therapist. And the thing is, so I had all sorts of grief. My dad had died when I was 13, suddenly from a heart attack, sitting next to her in a confirmation class. My mom was showing signs of Alzheimer's by the time I was a sophomore in high school and couldn't work anymore. I was the last
Mm,
one at home,
wow.
having to be the one who held it all together, I thought, and I was responsible for everything. And as a 3, I kept my image up. And so I kept doing well in school, and I was doing all the things I was expected to do. And I was so scared. And I didn't know I was scared. I just kept going. Like, I would talk about it. Like, yeah, my mom can't call me and she can't drive anymore, but that's okay. That's everybody's got their stuff. And so it wasn't until my sister made me see a therapist. And the therapist said the first thing, she said, "Sarah, seems like you've got a lot of grief, a lot of stuff to work through, but you don't have a strong sense of who you are at your core. Like, you don't have a strong sense of self." And I felt the truth of that hit so hard. And I was, what, 30? And I was
Right.
humiliated. And at the same time, like, oh, yeah, that all feels true. Okay. And so that got me into therapy, in my early 30s. And then I, at the same time, then started working with this coach. And had I known the Enneagram, this is why I'm so committed, David. Had I known the Enneagram in my 20s, I would have already known what the path was. That doesn't mean I could have followed it, but I at least would
Right.
have
You still might
known.
hit some of the same walls.
Right.
Yeah, you still might have hit some of the same walls. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not like it's
Yeah.
it's magic, but it does start to normalize. Like, in general, 3s are going to cut off from their own feelings. They're going to try to adapt to what everybody else wants from them, and they're going to completely disconnect from what they actually want. And so that once then I got the Enneagram lens at, I don't know, 50. It's like, oh, no wonder that was my
My
crisis, my
God.
series of
Open the
crises.
eyes.
It
Yeah.
was all about becoming what people expected from me. And my first Enneagram teacher said, "Sarah, we don't get 3s in here very often. How did you get here?" It was like,
I've heard the same thing.
yep, you're not wrong.
So, 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 what do you do when you now run into a hard charging 3?
Yeah,
How do you, well, I mean, because the thing is I find that if you can get a 3 to get into a learning mode that's related to their career development or something that's important to them, that's sometimes what I do.
yeah,
And then that over time, they're more of a slow fuse. That over
yeah,
time we can get, okay, what are you noticing about that? Maybe you
yeah,
should start some journaling. So I
yeah.
may take baby steps. But what would you say when you're running into a hard charging achiever about how to get them to slow down and self-reflect, which is one of the most difficult things for them to do, I think sometimes.
You just don't
What
want
do
to do
you
it.
what do you typically do
Yeah,
now
the
that you've been through the journey and
exactly.
you're yeah,
Well, it does help that I can say, "Yep, I'm a 3 too," so I understand. But
right?
if they land in their type, and what I know now is 3s want to be seen as successful. They want out there. They need someone to
Right.
see them. They don't need you to say, "Wow, you did that and that and that," but they do need to say, "Wow, you've worked hard. You're holding a lot. You're doing that and that and that." And so I just got on a call with a new client today, and, she's telling me about her world. And then I asked if she already knew her type, and she did, because this organization happens to use Enneagram a lot. And so then she starts to paint her world. And I just kept saying, wow, that is a lot. So you have already been promoted 3 times. You haven't even been there 18 months. The organization's been through all these major reorgs. Your scope of responsibility is really, really big, and they're asking you to focus on the thing you don't know how to do yet. That's got to be really hard. And she got really emotional. You know, threes are emotional types. They don't want to be. They're really good at shoving it down.
Yeah.
And so she got emotional, and
That's
it goes right to embarrassment, like I shouldn't be emotion, or it goes to shame. And I said, you know, the emotion is welcome here. Actually, that's information you need to have. And as a 3, the more we can tap into that, it doesn't mean you have to express it everywhere. But you and I need you to have the space to be able to get in touch with it, because that anger, that fear, that grief is giving you good information that actually your system probably needs from you. And so I normalize it, I make it okay, and then say, and my fear for you, you know, for 3s, the risk is everybody else is going to see your potential, and you're going to do what they expect from you, and you're not going to do what you want. And so part of my job as your coach is to help you get in touch with what is it you want. So I'm very much reinforcing they're not failing. You know, they're actually trying to do right by everybody, and they're trying to create good outcomes for everybody. And that's great, but that does get in the way of them, you know, actually keeping themselves in the mix. And so that starts to help. And then the sooner I can say, we're actually going to get in touch with, you know, use your information, get in touch with your emotions. The Enneagram actually gave me courage, and I'll make a sweeping generalization, especially with male 3s, because for men in our culture, being in touch with emotion is that much more kind of taboo in some ways. And so for me to be able to say, you have brain intelligence, you have heart intelligence, we know emotional intelligence matter, and you have somatic intelligence, and we want to have access to all 3. So, you know, a male client might say, or either, you know, I'm really anxious about this, and they're telling me all these things, and I'll say, okay, let's slow down for a minute. If that anxiety is information, let's tap into it. You know, is the anxiety really about disappointment? Is it anger? Is it, because that's going to help you understand, you know? And so it gave me more confidence as a coach to push people in ways that they wouldn't choose. Because 3s will always be like, look over here, look how successful I am. They're not going to say, yeah, what I want to look at is where I'm feeling scared and incompetent. So we have to, you know, create a safe way to do that.
That's beautiful. Well said. Thank you for that. Well, a couple more questions to kind of move towards the close here, but one's it's kind of stepping into from that individual picture to the big picture. I think we all wish we could have a crystal ball right now to see what the future holds, or maybe we're afraid to look at the crystal ball. I don't know. But given the craziness in the world today, and what's happening, and it's almost like, you know, organizations are almost like a safe place I can go from the craziness in a certain way. There are myriad ways that things could unfold in the world and business. But if you could hazard a guess, what do you believe organizations need to do to attend to some of that, and to continue to engage in their mission, keep their head down, focused, while also acknowledging the impact it's having on everybody right now? What are some things you believe organizations are going to have to begin doing or do more of to deal with the franticness of the world, while still being able to maintain their focus on trying to create value to their customers and to maintain their talent? Any
Great
thoughts
questions. I mean, I think a lot about, you know, the reason I love to work in organizations and with leaders is because we spend an enormous amount of time in those places. And I feel like in intact teams, you know, that's the reason I like to work with intact teams, is like that. Those are the people you're spending the most time with. And if in that environment, you can build skills around conflict, you can build self-awareness, you can learn together, you can normalize that adult development continues. You know, that's part of what I loved about the Leadership Circle profile, when they said, you know, if they're in adult development theory, say there are 5 levels, 85% of us stop at level 3. And I just keep thinking, the problems are getting more and more complicated. We need more leaders at 4 and 5. And what we know, you know, to be able to develop like that is we as individuals need practices that help us get back to an executive state, which means being able to tap into our hearts and, you know, trust the information we're getting there, be able to slow down enough to sense our bodies, you know, and take in the somatic now, so that our brains are spacious and thoughtful. And so if within teams, I also, it's the Lencioni model or whoever you want to think about, but high trust and high performance. Being able to create an environment where people feel seen and valued and a sense of belonging. We all need those as humans. And so I think going forward with the technology that's rapidly changing, it's like we need to tap more into our humanity and expand our consciousness. And so that means,
Yeah.
again, the reason I use the Enneagram is it normalizes, like we need access to all of our intelligence. And I think as leaders, we know there's research now, anxiety spreads through a system, fear spreads through a system. And if we as leaders can't, you know, um, tap into our peers or have the support we need to go, oh, wait a minute. Of course, there's a lot of fear right now because this big thing happened out in the world and we don't have control over that. So how do we acknowledge that? Not not make it bigger than it is, but also not step over it. And then, what are the conversations that we need to allow and not be afraid of, but allow so we can get some of the emotion and energy out and help people stay connected. And so that, again, conflict becomes generative when it's an indication something's not working, but we've got the skills to deal with it, as opposed to conflict being, dangerous and, causing harm.
Yeah. 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 I say it's well said. I mean, it's like there is so much greater capacity. So when I talk about we have three brains. We've got the head brain, the heart brain, the gut brain, right? And it's almost like in order for you to get connected to your heart, paradoxically, you have to be in your executive function and more aware, self-aware, and attentive to the moment.
Mm-hmm.
That is actually the first step. If you just try to go into your heart without doing that, it can be too dangerous, too scary.
Yeah.
You have to start, because but when you're in a centered state, you just naturally can drop in there.
It's easier. Mm-hmm.
And that sometimes requires some healing to do that.
Absolutely.
And coaching and having somebody like you or me to work with people or somebody else skilled,
Yeah.
that just saves so much time and suffering, and it ignites, as you say, there's these other levels of consciousness that are available to us. And I would say I've talked to some people I've been fortunate to meet that are at a very high level of that. And they say, but wait, there's more.
Right.
It just doesn't stop there.
Right.
We just haven't, there's nobody discovered what's possible.
Right.
It just continues to expand beyond that. The capacity of human beings, and that's why I do the work I do. And part of what I wanted to bring this, the capacity of human beings, the greater your consciousness, in a certain way, unless you have to sweat life, you just know how to do. The solution is right there in the moment.
Right.
And let's goes back to your first conversation, your first comment. Just let's get to the first base.
Yeah.
And let's figure out if we can understand what the issue is that we need to stand on to look for second base.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And it really is a lot simpler and less complex. And in a complex world, we have to become simpler. That probably doesn't sound right.
It
sounds counterintuitive,
but it's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anything else you want to add or say as a final comments for being on today?
Yeah, I think the piece I didn't say directly is, it's like we have emotional intelligence and all that. Now I feel like the next frontier is relational systems intelligence. Like there is wisdom in systems.
Yeah, say more about that.
Well, there's wisdom in relationships. There's wisdom in systems. And when we can start to trust that, I mean, to your point, that things get easier. Like if I'm in my 3 trance, I think everything's up to me. And guess what? I'll create a bunch of work for myself and everybody else. When I'm in that other more integrated state, then I'm calmer. And then for a 3, that becomes about like being the orchestra conductor and trusting that I'm part of a group. Everybody's bringing wisdom. It might not be me that brings it. It might be someone else. And so how do I start to create the space so solutions emerge rather than thinking it's up to me? And that's what I think leaders are called to do. It's like, how do I create the space so that people can bring their full talented giftedness to the table and then trust that solutions emerge when we learn how to do that. But that's really scary because it's, and so it's also building. Right. Building the ability to be with the uncertainty, be with not knowing. And, I think we're going to have to expand our capacity to be with not knowing. If I take this step and I don't know what's going to happen 4 steps down,
Absolutely.
Isn't that dangerous? And it's like, no, actually, trust your first step, breathe, stop, get more information, next step, and that's the emergent solutions. And I think leaders need to get more comfortable with that.
Right. Being unknown and it's kind of trusting that, again, the next, as you say, what needs to happen next will come to you.
Mhm.
Not to say you don't have moments of planning and
Oh,
analyzing
absolutely.
and data crunching.
Right.
That's valuable. But if we get fixated on that, it's like getting fixated on your type. We get locked in and we
Mhm.
miss a lot
You
around
miss the
us,
bigger
right?
part. Yeah, you miss the other
So,
information, the other signals.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing your insights and all that you shared today. It really was an integrated conversation. I felt like we went a lot of places that we came back to what we started with. So I appreciate what you brought to the table today. And I know our listeners gained a lot of your story and your expertise. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, David. I've really enjoyed it. It's fun to talk to somebody who sees the world in such a similar way. And so that's a real gift. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that is. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, to everybody listening out there, thank you for joining us on this journey. Your time and attention are truly appreciated. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you share it with others who could benefit colleagues, friends, or anyone seeking to lead with more impact, especially, in these crazy disruptive times that you're looking for support around that. If they're looking for support around that, I think they would benefit specifically from this show and others that we've done. You can catch this episode and all others via YouTube, or you can listen to it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or 14 other podcasting platforms. The link to the full list of the platforms is below in the description of this audio or video version. And as we close, remember what incredible value you bring when you invest in the growth and development of yourself and those around you. As an executive, you touch hundreds of lives over the course of your career. And when you do so, that as a leader, it truly changes beyond the results you produce for your organization. It truly changes the world and makes the world a better place. So until we meet again, keep leading purposefully and creating meaningful value in your organizations. And I'm wishing you a fantastic rest of your day. This is David Craig Utz, Leadership Alchemist, signing off for now. Until next time.